Welcome to this video on paper 2, question 4. Paper 2 is the non-fiction paper, where 50% of your overall GCSE. Okay, quick recap on the paper itself. So it's two pieces of non-fiction, one usually a modern writer and one taken from over 50 or 100 years ago, and both writers writing about a topic, and we see their different viewpoint on that particular topic. Question 4 is what we call the grade booster, because it's really important. It will help increase your marks, and if you can get question 4 right, then it does help your overall grade and your overall mark. So if we look at the paper itself and we look at how it works, question 4 is a combination of all the questions together, and basically it's that summarizing of the writer's thoughts and feelings on the topic, linking it into the writer's perspective, but also linking it into how the writer uses language. So you can see how it's a mixture of question 2 and question 3. The exam board think that you should work through the paper. Obviously your school and your teacher will give you advice, but they say that you work through the paper and you should be at the point where you get to question 4 being able to write about all these things together. Now, before we actually look at the question in more detail, we need to go back to something we've looked at in a previous video. The title of the paper is about viewpoints and perspectives. So it's really important to have this clearly in your mind. These two pieces of writing will be about looking at a text from a different angle. So for example, we've got fire, and so we know that a caveman would view fire differently to somebody in the modern age. And so what we'd see is a different, and they would treat fire differently and think of it differently and feel about it differently. So a caveman would probably be shocked and maybe impressed by fire, whereas a modern reader would probably be sort of worried and kind of cautious about it, know that it's dangerous. And so you can see that two people can have different perspectives and a different attitude towards fire. And that's what this paper's about, because it's looking at a topic and looking to see how a person has a different perspective and looking at what that different perspective is. Okay, let's have a look at how to respond to the paper and how to plan for the response. So the first thing you need to do is think about the perspective. So the perspective we've got for source A is it's a father who's a journalist and wrote it in 2016, but also wrote it for the Guardian newspaper. And the Guardian newspaper is a very sort of liberal newspaper. It tends to be very left field, and also it tends to be for educated people. Okay, educated middle class people, and it gives you an idea of sort of the audience that he's writing for, and we could probably assume that he's that kind of person, an educated liberal person. Well, then we can think about what the writer is thinking. Well, the writer thinks that children grow up too quickly and he doesn't get a chance to enjoy it fully, yet he doesn't want to hold his son back. So what we've got there are two ideas really, and that word, yeah, it's quite a powerful word, but what it does is it links two separate things. And you've got to think about our own mind, is that we often have more than one idea related to a topic. And so we often have sometimes conflicting things. So here he wants the child to grow up, wants the child's growing up too quickly, but then he doesn't want to hold him back. So you can see that there's kind of a conflict within his thought processes. And then we can also look at the emotions. Here he's worried. He's worried that he might miss something or not appreciate things because the speed at which his child is growing up is happening so quickly. So he's scared and worried. If we look at the second piece, now the second piece is written from the mother's perspective, and it's written in Victorian times. Now, a lot of people would focus on the fact that one is a modern text and one is an old text. You really don't get that many marks for just saying that one is old and one's new. And actually what you notice is a lot of students focus on that, and that becomes a bit limiting in terms of how you can explain things, because you end up going, one is old, one is new, one uses old language, one uses new language, and really that gets you no marks. So what's the interesting point here is that they're both journalists, but one is a mother and one is a father. So the slight angle change that we've got here is one is a mother and one is a father. And so we can use these texts to then thread this idea that how does a father see things differently? How does a mother see things differently? So then here we've got the mother misses the child because she had more control and relationship with her child when the child was younger. Now this point picks out another subtle point, is actually in source B the child has grown up. In source A the child is 1 year old, and so actually there is another perspective here. We've got a mother whose child has grown up compared to a father who is living with that child at the moment that hasn't grown up. And so that's a very, very different perspective. And so that helps us understand. And so when you're comparing and thinking about these two things, it actually helps you to understand the wider picture of things. So what does she feel? Well, the child has grown up, so she feels sad for the child that's got back. And she's got a sense of nostalgia, which is thinking fondly of the past. And that's what she's doing. She thinks of the past in something quite nice way. And that sense that she's lost something. And she's not just lost that sense of control, but the relationship with her child. And she misses the son that she used to be, that she used to have. And so you can see very, very clearly that actually we can build that picture up by thinking about the perspective, what the writer thinks, and what the writer feels. We'll go through that in a bit more detail then. So if you think about the perspective, and these are the questions that you've got to be thinking with the text in front of you, what makes their viewpoint slightly different? Now this question isn't about spotting the similarities and differences. All right? This isn't a compare and contrast. This is looking at two people and thinking about their slightly different perspective. And that key word, slightly. How is it slightly different? Okay, and it's not going to be one is old and one is new. Here we've got two slightly different perspectives, one being a mother and father, the other is the fact that we've got one whose child has grown up and the other whose child hasn't grown up, and that's slightly. So think about the angle, because that's really, really important. If you understand the angle, then you can understand why they think the way they are. Then think about the thoughts. What are they really thinking? We all say one thing, but we mean something else. So what is the writer really, really thinking? And this is where you've got to do that inference. You've got to look under the text. Okay? And remember also that when we're thinking things, we often have opposing thoughts on a topic. And I'll give you the example here, that you may like and dislike your brother or sister at the same time. They can drive you mad, but you can still love them. And so we have those conflicting ideas. And thinking about when reading a text that it's not all one thing or another. We're not either happy, happy, happy. We can sometimes be happy and sad at the same time. The other thing to think about is feelings. Feelings are complex, and writers have more than one feeling when dealing with a topic. And that level of complexity needs to be explained. And that's why vocabulary is vital for that question. Because really, we might say, well, the writer is sad about this. But actually, with words, there are better words to describe different feelings. And actually, you're an age now where you can use different words to describe different feelings. And it's the different feelings that are going to help you explain. Is the writer feeling bitter? Okay, are they disappointed? Are they bleak? Are they morbid or depressed? Those words all mean sad, but they mean sad in different ways. So bitter is usually you blame somebody for something. Disappointed, you were hoping for something good, but you ended up with something bad. Bleak, you think nothing good is going to happen. Morbid, really, really negative and almost kind of a deathly feeling. That depressed is a feeling of sadness that's gone on for a long time and you can't get out of it. So you can see that one word actually helps to explain what's going on. So once you've gone through that and thought about the perspective, thought about what the writer is thinking and what the writer is feeling, then you can have a look at the text. And it's better to start with what the writer is thinking or feeling before looking at the techniques. One of the hardest things to do in English is find a technique and then try and explain what the writer is feeling or thinking. And often, a lot of times, students can spot a technique and go, oh, I can find alliteration. But try and explain what alliteration means and why the writer has done it. It's quite a hard thing. So the best thing to do is start with what the writer thinks or feels, and then zoom into the techniques. So for example, here we've got a mother and her child is grown up. That's the perspective. She thinks, like others, she should be happy because her house is tidy. However, she feels a sense of desperation, longing, and desire and regret, okay, because of what she feels that she's missed. And so, for example, when we're looking at the text, and this is what I'd suggest for students to do, is pick a really good paragraph and use that as your anchor. And use that as an anchor to pick out techniques, and then you can always look at the rest of the text, and that's fine, but if you've got a starting point, that's better than looking at the whole text to try and find things. Okay, so we've got this idea of things being happy, that she should be happy, and so we could use the idea of the word should be pleasant. Okay, and my guests say it's pleasant here. Everything's so orderly. Okay, nothing underfoot and that. So we've got this idea here of positive language, pleasant, so we can zoom in that, and that links into this idea that she should be happy. She should be happy because her house is tidy. And then we've got this idea of lists. So we've got listing things of all the things that should be happening. So listing all the things, and then we've got this idea of crumbs on the cup. We've got a bit of alliteration there. So you can see I've got lots of techniques that I can link into this idea of how she should be happy. There's a lot for her to be happy. She's got a tidy house. There's no crumbs all over the place. It's all neat and tidy. Okay, and so really what we can say is that kind of thing, well, it seems nice, but actually it's not really nice for her. She wants that child, and it's that sign of, and actually all these things link into her desperation and her desires. She wants that back because really she liked that. She secretly liked it, and she kind of regrets what's happening. But then we can also link into this idea of how she used to fret, and that word there, that verb, how she used to fret about things. Fret means like stressing and panicking over things, you know, and maybe she didn't appreciate what was it like. She used to panic about things being messy, and now that she's older and her child's grown up, that really she should have enjoyed it more, possibly, you know, and actually, you know, these people telling her that the house is all nice and isn't it nice, and actually she wants that, she's longing for that to happen again. So you can see how you can link those into your ideas there. Let's have a look at the next one. Again, let's think about perspective. So the father, the child is still young, what does he feel? Thinks that he's losing something, some of the things that made the child, okay, a child. And we've got that sense of, you know, disappointment, and that sense of kind of nostalgia, and that kind of sense of regret. Okay, so when I look at the text, what things can I find in there? This idea of tiny, the tiny baby, that adjective gives that sense of how small it is, and that kind of, if it's small, it's easily lost, isn't it? Okay, and it keeps looking at, talking about things being small, and this idea of being a baby, and this idea of like nestled and wanting to be protected. And maybe that's idea, maybe the father feels that the disappointment that he can't look after this child in the way that he used to do, and be overly protective while it was sucking on his little finger in the middle of the night, and he can be like that. You know, and this idea that, you know, the child used to be amazed by the taste of food, and so, you know, that sense of regret, and he's thinking nostalgic back to what happened. We've even got things like verbs like totters over. Okay, so that idea of, you know, the tottering, that he could fall over, anything, you know, that now maybe the child isn't tottering over. And so you can see that this all links into those ideas there. So how do I build this into a writing, and how do I write about this response? So the key thing is that you start with what is the writer thinking or feeling. So the writer feels this. What evidence am I going to use to support that idea? And then we've got the reasoning. Why do they think and feel this? And that sometimes is linked to the perspective. Well, because a father would think this, or because a mother would think this, or because the child has grown up, this is the reason why. And so in your writing, that's what you've got to be doing. So the writer thinks this is the evidence that we've got in the text to support it, and then we've got that reasoning in there. Now it says in the question, compare. Okay, so compare, obviously, we think, looking for similarities and differences. Well, that's quite easy then when you're thinking about thoughts and feelings, because you can compare and you can say, well, both feel quite sad. Source A feels sad because of this, and source B feels bad because of this. All right, and so the comparison can be a connection between the thoughts and feelings. One of the things to be careful of is trying to compare techniques. Very rarely will writers use the same sort of techniques. What you will find is you'll find that the writers will have probably the same feeling or the same thought about the topic, or they might have a different thought or a different feeling, and that's easier to explain. So for example, one writer is upset about how his child is growing up, the other is also, but they're a father, and so it's different. Okay, so we've got the idea there. So use that as a guide. So start with the thoughts or feelings, zoom into a technique, and then reason about it. Why do they think or feel this? Why do they do that? What does this quote or this evidence show us? Okay, we're going to summarize now and go back. So, true or false? Quickly pause the video and see if you can spot which of these are true and which of these are false in relation to the text and the question. So let's go through the answers then. So number one, you will be marked down if you only mention one of the texts. That's true. Okay, your mark is capped. You can't get over a certain mark if you only mention one text, and it limits you completely. You cannot get in the top band in terms of marks for this question if you only mention one of the texts. Number two, you don't need to write about language and the writer's techniques. That's false. You do need to write about the language and writer's technique. However, what you do need to do is start with ideas first and the writer's thoughts and feelings. Number three, you need to write a paragraph for each of the bullet points. No, that's false. The bullet points are there just to guide you, all right, of what to put in a paragraph. Do not write a paragraph for each of the bullet points. That won't help you to explain your ideas. Number four, you must use quotations and terminology in this answer. That's true. Okay, as with most of the questions, quotations and terminology are key. Number five, the examiner doesn't want you to focus on the reader and the impact on the reader. That's true. Okay, do not talk about the reader for this question. There are no marks. Okay, and it stops you from talking about the writer. So focus on the writer. Number six, you should make a point about the fact that one text is modern and one text is old. That's false. Okay, avoid that where possible. Yes, they will be from different periods of time, but really there'll be something else about the angle and there'll be something interesting. Yes, Victorians might view cars differently to modern people, but really you can explain that in a bit better way than just saying one is a modern text, one is an old text. So you've got to really explain that point. Number seven, you must rationalize your point and say why the writer thinks or feels something. One of the big things that students do is they just say the writer feels this, but they don't do the because. Why do they think this? Why do they feel this? That's a really, really important thing, because that's what the examiner wants to see, you explaining what the writer thinks and feels, and that shows that you understand the text, what it's really, really about. And that's the end.